Once again with sound. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Governance, Risk and Audit Committee of North Norfolk District Council on Tuesday, the 2nd of June. Apologies for the slightly late start, but we had some technical issues. Right, do we have some apologies for absence, please?
We do, Chair. So we've had the independent person, Mr. Platten, give their apologies, Chair.
Thank you. I think I'll send him a note to just wish him well.
Yeah.
Thank you. I understand that Councillor Holiday is on her way and has been caught in traffic, but will be here very shortly. Excellent. So we don't need any substitutes. Do we have any public questions?
No public questions, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest, please, members? No declarations of interest. Do we have any items of urgent business?
None, Chair.
Thank you. In which case we move to the minutes of the last meeting. I'm afraid I wasn't able to attend the last meeting. Councillor Fletcher kindly chaired that. Was anybody else here at the last meeting? So are you able to advise that they are a true record of that meeting? And are there any points that you need to raise? So, thank you.
Yeah, if you've got to propose them, I'd be happy to propose. Yeah, Chris, yeah, lovely, thank you.
You're happy to second?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. External auditors annual report. I think before we start this afternoon, I have said in advance that if we can all make sure we'd read the papers and that we can keep presentations to brief. Perfect timing. We're just starting. It's fine. We had some technical problems, so it's fine. We were just about to start with the external auditors report. As I said, I'd hoped everyone would read because we've got a big agenda this afternoon. But we also had a discussion in our briefing call about the risk register and whether we move the risk register report to the July meeting, so not until the next full meeting, because the independent person has given us quite a lot of recommendations and ideas, which Mr. Hems is putting together in a report for us. So we wondered whether it was worth putting that report through to next time, but I'm happy to take the committee's steer on that. Does anyone have any objections, or would they rather look at the risk register today? Excellent.
Chair, could I suggest that you could probably have a quick look at the risk register in terms of those items that we've recommended to take off?
Yes, we'll do that when we get to that item.
Yeah,
thank you, yes. So we will have a quick look at the risk register, but won't go into the depth that we normally would. But I thought since we've got the meeting in July, it's not like it's going to have to wait, 3 or 4 months till the next meeting, like it might have had to do. Okay. Right, so let us move to the external auditors report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. So first item from us is agenda item 7. It starts on page 13. I'll be brief in terms of the intro. So this is the auditor's annual report for 2024-25. So the NEO Code of Audit Practice, which essentially defines what we need to do and what we need to report, requires us to report an auditor's annual report essentially after the conclusion of the audit. The messages within this report are largely consistent to what you would have received back in February. The key things, I guess, to pull out are on pages 6 and 7 of our report, and that's 18 and 19 of your pack. In that, a disclaimer of opinion, which we discussed at the last committee, was given on the 17th of February. It's partly due to lack of assurance over opening balances, but also there were a number of in-year balances within the 24-25 accounts that we could not get sufficient evidence for on which to conclude. That report also includes our value for money commentary, which is obviously another requirement of the audit. As a result of that disclaimer of opinion and some of the weaknesses we identified in the audit of the financial statements, there was a significant value for money weakness reported in relation to financial reporting. Again, we talked that through at the last committee. Bits that are still outstanding, so I can't formally close the year because we're still waiting for the NEO to confirm whether they need us to do any further work on whole of government accounts. It's probably unlikely, but until they do that, I can't actually formally close the year. There's more context and background on our second report, so I'll pause there, but happy to take any questions on this report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fredericks.
Thank you, and thank you for an incredibly comprehensive report. The papers of which you speak that are still outstanding, what are we doing to rectify that?
If I may, Chair?
Yes, of course.
Yes, so there were certain areas of the audit working papers that didn't meet the standards. And because of time pressures and the backstop date, the audit was closed, save for any additional working papers required, any additional inquiries required by the National Audit Office. So for the 24-25 accounts, we won't be reopening those accounts unless directed via the external auditor. So we won't be addressing those. However, those issues will still remain for the 25-26 audit, which is the subject of agenda item number 8. And I can pick up with that audit paper, with that GRAC paper, what our intentions are in terms of remedying those weaknesses. I could answer it now, or we can wait till we've had the introduction to the next paper.
I think we can answer it when we come to the following years. But is that acceptable to you?
We can see what the activities are. We've had conversations with Don and the finance team. They've engaged in the process. They've looked at the recommendations. I guess in terms of, is it acceptable? I won't know until we kind of get to do the audit and follow up those recommendations and see if those issues have been resolved or if they're still present.
Okay. Thank you. And just, is there a person that's responsible for looking at this, you know, in a whole? So they're chasing individual papers, because I know that you're all incredibly busy, but is there a person allocated to do that?
Yes, so ultimately the responsibility sits with myself as a Section 151 officer, and I take those responsibilities very seriously. In terms of the team, I have a very, very capable deputy Section 151 officer who has very recent experience of auditing, having been his prior appointment was as an auditor to a different part of Ernst & Young. We are also pleased to announce that we have recruited and filled the role of Chief Technical Accountant, who has a key role in terms of making sure that the audit papers are complete, especially around the balance sheet notes, which was an area of weakness. And that we're pleased to announce that officer commenced their service at the council yesterday. So hopefully they will enjoy themselves and be as productive as we anticipate them being.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Fletcher and then Councillor Penfold.
The graph on that table is kind of setting out the optimum path to getting back to a clean opinion as set out in kind of the National Audit Office's LARIG documents they produced in order to kind of steer auditors and the public kind of through the process. In terms of how far, it's kind of a difficult one because you'll see 24, 25 could still be a disclaimer of opinion. I think there's different types of disclaimer opinion. There can be a disclaimer where we're disclaiming just on historical balances. And then there's a disclaimer where it's historical balances and we've still got some gaps in year. And that's kind of where you are, which is almost back to like your 23, 24. So if we had a good year in 25, 26 and we completed all planned procedures, actually there's a big element of natural rebuild there. So I think to answer your question, it's difficult, but I would probably say 1 to 2 years behind, but with capacity to kind of speed that up in terms of recovery.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and apologies for just going over this again. I'm picking up Councillor Fredericks' point that it is quite concerning, I think, that the external auditors haven't been able to complete their procedures or to conclude on anything because the council wasn't able to provide satisfactory working papers. So that doesn't sound great to me. And so could you just go over that again, because I'm not sure I picked it up right. Why weren't we able to provide those papers? But we think we can going forward. That's a staffing thing, presumably.
It's a staffing, education and resource issue. We still had quite a lot of gaps in the team last year, which we've now filled. In terms of experience amongst the team, the auditing standards and the quality of papers has shifted quite dramatically in the 3 to 4 years since the previous audit. So the goalposts have moved, but we have to adapt and change to that. There, I think, was probably a focus on, there wasn't sufficient focus on the year of the audit, which is something we want to address for the 25-26 audit, so that some of the historic issues we will deal with in time, but focus on getting assurance about the year of the audit. And that's something that David and I have discussed. And we're also, in terms of making sure that the team are ready and know what's expected of them, we're arranging workshops with the Ernst & Young team, so that we can get direct feedback on what we need to do differently, what excellent looks like, not just what good looks like, so that we can be prepared ahead of the audit, so that we're having those conversations a long time before the actual very tight deadlines that surround the fieldwork and the backstop date. So because we are mindful that our auditors are also equally stretched, and they have limited capacity to and fro with clients, not just us, it's across the board. So that's why the objective is to get everything right first time, because there isn't always the capacity to come back and revisit items.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So, I mean, in previous years, we have obviously provided the correct papers, satisfactory working papers. So I guess the concern is, as you said, the goalposts moved, but we didn't really move with them, or we didn't move with them. You know, we weren't on the ball, as it were, to carry on the football analogy. So just going forward, if those goalposts move again, we've got to make sure that we do keep up with it and stay on the ball. That's correct? So that was a sort of a blip, as it were, which we won't repeat. One hopes. Thank you.
I think I've made clear my thoughts on that already. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you. Yes, I'd just like to follow up, obviously, on what my colleagues have just said, because I have a memory when I asked at the last meeting what you thought the report, this year's report would be, and I had an understanding you thought it would likely be another disclaimed report because of the ongoing issues in terms of getting all the information that you have required. And I think at the time we sort of pressed officers on that, but just I just think picking up, we pay a lot of money to council for these reports, £170,000. If we're ending up with a disclaimed report, that's not really great value for money for any of us, is it? We don't get anything off the back of that. So I think as a committee, we really ought to be holding officers' feet to the fire to say, actually, you really do need to make sure that we get the information so you can give something at least a qualified opinion, as I see as the next step up the ladder in terms of doing that. And obviously from the officer's point of view, if you're struggling with the resources to do that, then I think that needs to be fed back to this committee to say, well, what can we do to help? Because I'm concerned there's a bit of a shrug of the shoulders there when we had the last meeting when we covered this, to be honest with you.
I think that it's a very reasonable point that you've just raised. In the pre-meeting, I made very clear that for as long as I've been the chair of this committee, I keep hearing reasons why and capacity issues. I've heard a lot of reasons why, which are perfectly legitimate, but we cannot allow this to continue as an audit committee. And I have some ideas of making a plan for a way forward, which I'll come to at the end once you've all asked your questions. And then we can ask whether the auditor and our section 151 think the plan will make some progress. But there are two things that I think we need to take into consideration. There's one, our capacity. And I've said already today in our pre-meeting that I think we need to look for some resilience in that capacity, because when one person goes, we are exposed, and that's not good enough. And the second thing is looking at the auditors. You know, they've been advised by MHCLG to work with, you know, people who are ready. But that suggests there's a lack of capacity on their side too, and timing. I understand it's taken quite a long time to get this workshop set up for staff so that they know exactly what reports. And, you know, with respect, if people don't know what they need to be doing to get it right, then it's going to take longer to get them to be doing the right things. So there's lots of things we need to be doing. Yes, by all means, come in.
Sorry, just to touch on the capacity. So we have got capacity to deliver a normal year-end audit. The capacity comes from the backstop. So before all of the backstop dates, the major issue was we'd start an audit, working papers wouldn't be great. It'd be back and forth, and it would go on several months before we concluded. We can no longer do that because you've got a backstop. So that's kind of where the capacity cap has come in. I think just in terms of the workshop, we've been offering them to a number of clients. They've gone down really well. We have offered it here earlier in the year, but we're just waiting for confirmation of when the dates work for officers. So we're kind of ready to go on it, but we're just waiting for officers. But we've delivered them. It's gone down well in a few places, and I think just need to make sure that the finance team have got the right people around the table. And obviously, the one's only just started. One is coming back, so I think it's key that they've got their team there to kind of hear those messages and work with us.
Councillor Cushing, did you wish to come back, or are you?
No, not really. I'm supportive of the comments that you just made. I think we're all in agreement on it, certainly as a committee, in terms of where we are and what we need to do and what we need to do in order to try and help. But who watches the watchers? Well, it's us to keep an eye on the officers to do that, because I think that's what our job is as a committee here. It's an important role in the council. This is important, particularly in the context of going to local government reform. We're clearly going to crawl all over our finances to make sure they all add up when they amalgamate and put them together, if it ever happens.
That's a bigger question than we can answer here this afternoon. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at page 26 and 27, the audit of financial statements, I find it concerning that both process and outcome seem to be ineffective and requiring improvement. And that seems to me quite damning. I mean, where does one go with that? You can't get the process right, and you can't get the outcomes right. That indicates there's a lot of work to do to me. Thank you.
I absolutely agree with you. I think it's, you know, very concerning that we are seeing what we're seeing. And when I see a best value notice, it warning, you know, it concerns me greatly. And we have to move forwards. Would you like to sort of talk, both of you, about some of the ideas we've had about trying to improve things. I know we talked in the pre-meeting about, things from audit, for example, and also from yourself.
If I may begin, so the agenda item 7 is primarily the same as what this committee received in February. The finance team have taken on board the auditor's recommendations. There's been a particular focus around the close down and the cut-off issues that we experienced in April 2025 for the 24-25 accounts. So there's been a focus on checking the accuracy of that work. We are looking forward to this workshop that we've discussed, and that will allow us also, one, to know what the quality of the audit papers need to be to allow that first time approach to be successful. Secondly, it allows us to focus on those areas of the working papers and the audit testing where we can add the most value with the resources we've got. So, for example, focusing on the current year of audit and maybe deprioritising some of the historic information, because we need to get that business as usual audit right. And that will help us when we know what we need to provide. There's always going to be an inherent risk with a small team. This is a very small council. The LGR work streams that we've been engaged with has shown that North Norfolk District Council has far fewer officers compared to all our comparative councils within Norfolk. And that does create an inherent risk where you've got single points of failure should somebody be off with illness or choose a different opportunity outside the organisation. It does create problems, and I think that's inherent. Also, without lamenting our lot, it's a very specialised subject area, local government accounts, and it's not something that's easy to recruit into. But as I said, we've been successful in filling our technical position. We did find somebody who didn't have a local government background, but neither did my deputy, and he's turned out to be an outperforming member of the team. So I have every confidence in our new appointment. And I think that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Yeah, just kind of just noted down. I think there's 5 things where we can kind of work with officers and help them going forward. So, number 1, we made a number of recommendations in last year's report. You know, the bigger areas where we kind of needed to see improvements. So obviously, that's kind of a starting point. The workshop we've obviously talked about. Working paper requirements. In terms of those goalposts shifting, I think where they've shifted is we're now far more prescriptive in terms of what we need. So we're trying to do as much as we possibly can to kind of make it as straightforward as possible for officers to understand. But as a result of that, the working paper requirements look quite complex and quite substantial, but they really are trying to get to that point of, if you can do all of this, then the audit's going to run a lot smoother and it will be right first time. So we're trying to work on that to kind of work with finance teams. I think there's then the phasing of the audit. So the year-end audit, we've purposefully phased it a little bit later than audits that are maybe a little bit further progressed in terms of their readiness for the audit, to give officers that space to kind of prepare the accounts, but then importantly prepare the working papers that kind of come behind that. And the last thing, I think I mentioned this at the previous committee, we're about to release a sector report. So this is sector findings from the 24-25 audit across all of our councils. So that table that you're referring to, the red, green, amber, that will be in place, but it will show how all councils have done. So you can kind of see where you are pictured in terms of the clustering of councils. I think, as we've said previously, when first disclaimers were issued, there was a big pack, and you were part of that big pack. Clearly, as we move forward, and we're not there yet, but as we move forward, you'll start to see that pack becoming smaller. And what you obviously want to try and avoid is being left in that pack, because the profile on that pack will become more intense than those that have moved to an unqualified or even a clean opinion in like 1 or 2 years' time. So, I mean, I'm hoping that will be ready potentially for the next committee, and it can, I'll share it with Don, the chair, and the committee, so you can kind of see that report, and there will be an addendum where you can see where North Norfolk sits in relation to the sector. And this is based on our judgment and based on our findings from the 24-25 audits. Within that, we've also pulled out as much as we can what good looks like. So those councils at the other end, what is it they've been doing that kind of has aided the preparation of a set of accounts, has aided a smooth and efficient audit process where we've been able to rebuild. So again, some more hints and tips to support the council.
Thank you. I saw that Councillor Holliday would like to come back in.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered what percentage of councils of our size had unqualified or clean ratings, as it were, and is there a correlation between the size of the finance department in terms of staffing and the outcome of the audit? Thank you.
So I wish I had the report in front of me now. So I have seen an early draft, and you're absolutely right. When I saw the early draft, there is definitely you look at the scale, those that are unqualified, closest to clean, those that are more heavily disclaimed. Smaller district councils are to this end of the scale. So you're absolutely right. Those with less capacity, impacted more by key staff leaving, are definitely down that end, with the bigger authorities with more capacity, more resilience, the higher performing. Having said that, there are some smaller councils that are kind of shifting that way. But definitely when you see that sector report, you'll see that correlation.
So I think we can all agree that this is not where we want to be, and there needs to be some improvement. We talked in the pre-meeting about trying to find some resilience for the department, and whether there's finance available within the council to do that. I know that the Section 151 officer expressed concern about whether we'll be able to recruit into that position if the money was approved by council to do that. But I actually think it's something that we should look at and see whether we can find a way to progress, because I do think we need to improve our resilience. We can't keep falling over. So I'll be speaking with our finance portfolio holder and with the Section 151 to see if that's something we can move forwards with. Councillor Cushing.
Yes, just on that subject, I mean, it's obviously full-time staff, but I don't know is this sector whether there's the option for contractual staff who have the skills who could be shipped in for a few months to help pilot us through.
Yes, there are. We had a mixed bag with some interims, insofar as it's very difficult to get interims to come to Norfolk. So you have to have people that work remotely. There can be, I've been an interim. I was a fantastic interim, but I might say that. There are others that aren't as robust with their working papers and don't provide a full audit trail, but that's down to the employer to manage them. The problems you do have is that they will chase a higher salary. And I happen to know that interims through an agency, so not necessarily going to a firm of accountants, if it's a 151 officer, it's £2,000 a day. They're more expensive than chief executives now. There's a complete shortage of qualified accountants in local government, and to put it into context, there aren't any monitoring officers. So hopefully we'll hang on to us. So yes, there are interims available. They don't necessarily have all the specific experience, but we will be looking at all opportunities that we can to help us get over the line. The chief technical accountant role that we filled yesterday The person started yesterday. That was vacant for 4 months. And there weren't any candidates from local government.
So I think we need to look at all options and see what's possible and what isn't possible and what it will deliver in terms of improvement. But that we need to do some work on that and be able to report back to council probably in July, I think. Sorry, not council, to audit committee in July when we come back, what we found on that. I think there might be something about, I said, I don't want to get to the next meeting of audit after the July meeting and find that we're suddenly still way behind and we weren't aware of it as a committee. So I think there's something about us, even if it's just a couple of lines from you, Anastasia, rather than you, one of you, I don't mind which, just telling us how things are going, in your opinion. Whether you've got any live concerns so that we can be bringing them to people's attention and saying, guys, what are we doing about this? Because that's our role as audit, is to try and help, not beat people over the head, but try and help and find ways to move things forward. Councillor Penfold, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering whether there's a recommendation around this. You were talking about conversations or meetings that you were intending to have. I think that might be the basis for it, but I think we probably ought to know given our concerns, that the chair will now seek to meet with the appropriate officers to discuss, the path forward. I don't know whether that's at this agenda point or a bit later on, because obviously we've got linked reports coming, but I would think we should do something formal.
I think you're right. I think once we've just discussed all the different bits within it, I think there should be a recommendation so that we can bring it forward. Councillor Fredericks, you also said you'd like to come in.
I think that because we're going forward to an incredibly busy time, and I am worried about our capacity all over the council, to be fair, because they're having to spin a lot of plates. And I am worried that there will be plates that are dropped. And I think that we need to look at the structure of teams as well. If we can get some more admin into teams, that might help you. So not necessarily top tier senior, but maybe there's some admin that could be done and maybe pull from our talent bank.
Thanks, Councillor Fredericks. That's something I tried earlier.
The chair and I did discuss that useful suggestion. Unfortunately, as agreed with the external auditor, the challenge is at the qualified level and the management level. It's not administrators, it's people with technical skills and experience is where we lack resource and capacity.
So I think, unless anyone's got any more questions, we put together a recommendation. Sorry, Councillor Holliday.
This with reference to the risk register, which I know we're just going to postpone, but when we look at, aren't we going to discuss it in July?
Sorry, yes, we are.
It's just that there are cross references between the risk register and the external audit report. So before we put it to bed, the risk, I think, for the governance on the risk register is not high enough. It doesn't reflect the external audit outcomes. And I'd like that to be noted. Thank you.
I think we can make sure that's noted. I think there's something about the internal auditor has just done a governance audit and found that's come out, that will come out during the report this afternoon. But one of the comments there was that was one of the better audits that's gone ahead. So I think we need to balance them all out. I'm not saying I don't disagree with you that there's a risk here, but we just need to balance it out. So, any more questions before I try and make? So, are we recommending then that we would like myself to meet with the 151 and the deputy leader, finance portfolio holder, to discuss the resilience of the finance department and whether we can find any ways of releasing some funding to look at that in a wider context. And that we would like headline reporting. I don't think we want any detail, but maybe monthly from section 151 and from the chief auditor to tell us, are we on track? Are we making the progress that we need to make? So if I propose, do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Fredericks. Is everyone in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Right, so we move on to the next report, please.
Thank you. So we now move into 25-26, agenda item 8, starting on page 47 of your pack, is our external audit planning report for the audit of your 25-26 statement of accounts. As obviously, as in previous years, the scope hasn't changed. There will be an opinion on your accounts. There will be a value for money, consideration and reporting. So on pages 51 53 of your pack, it sets out a lot of the context that we have just been discussing in terms of where the council are, how we're prioritising resources. I won't go into detail on that again, but again, I'm happy to pick up any specific questions at the end. On pages 54 to 55 of your pack, that's 8 and 9 of our page numbers. That table sets out the audit risks for the coming year. Probably quite familiar in terms of what you've seen in previous years. I'll just pick out 2 changes. So the risk around valuation of your non-current assets, your land and buildings. There's been an adaptation to the SIPFA code in 25-26, whereby they have now introduced indexation to be applied to assets in between a quinquennial valuation. That is still bedding down. So the idea of this is to make it more efficient and smooth, probably both for financial reporting purposes and for the audit purposes. I'm not quite sure it's had that desired effect just yet, but it's an additional factor that obviously we will need to look at when we audit the accounts. The other change was in relation to the risk we have around your pensions, asset and liability figures that are on the balance sheet. So normal procedures will be applied. But this is the first year following the last triennial valuation. So we do some additional work around the triennial valuation, which essentially sets that baseline asset and liability for the next 3 years. Other than that, I'm more than happy to take any questions or go into more detail in the report, if helpful to the committee.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions, please? I'm very quiet. I've got a few questions. So let me just go to where mine were. With me. So I suppose my first comment was that we were supposed to be having the asset register to this committee, and unfortunately it hasn't come, which doesn't fill me with great loads of confidence. It worries me. But I am aware that there have been extremist circumstances with officers having to take emergency leave. Is that the reason why we haven't got that report?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. So I think we can understand it was there is a very good reason why the officer had to go off suddenly. But I think it's just just a symptom, another symptom that's worrying me at the moment. So we've already covered the comment about our progress. it's the timings, it's the worrying. I have to say, a question for the auditor. On page 83, we have a point that I have brought up before, which I really don't like. And that is when we're looking at numbers for audit figures and how much we're going to be paying you, it says to be confirmed. And I said before, I wouldn't be taking anyone on to do a job for me outside of here. For me personally, if they gave me a to be confirmed figure. So why am I accepting it when I'm spending other people's money? Could you give me some response to that, please? Because I'm very uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, absolutely fair challenge. I guess there's two answers depending on which year we're looking at. So the easier year is 25-26. The to be confirmed is essentially because we don't know the scale of the issues that we're going to identify, or the extra work that we. So if we had no issues and there was no extra scope, then there wouldn't be anything. So that's why it's to be confirmed. 24-25 is probably where there's more of a question mark as to why we can't report, because we do it under a PSAA framework. So PSAA essentially, you're contracted to PSAA rather than contracted to EY. PSAA have requested that we do not disclose additional fees until they are determined by PSAA. So there is a fairly robust process where PSAA will send a request to us to document where we have done extra work, and that goes down to the number of hours, the reporting, the issues we've identified. It's pretty comprehensive and robust that we have to report. They will then look at that, and they will look at it for every council across the country to moderate. They will also review a percentage of files. So they will actually check what we put in those disclosures are evidenced on the file in the form of extra work that we have performed. At the end of that process, they will then determine the audit fee. So they will write to the council and say, okay, we've now determined the extra fee. It is X. At that point, we can then include it in our audit reporting. So that's why it's to be confirmed, because although we've submitted, PSA have not yet determined the value for 24-25. What I can do is, obviously, once it's determined, is to let the committee know and report that way.
Yes, please. I mean, but I think it's, 25 finished, a while ago now. And it would be nice, do we know when they might come out with this figure?
So we submitted what we signed off in February. We submitted April. Yeah, in April, I think we submitted. They had a number of years to kind of catch up, but they have, I think, largely caught up. So 23-24 has all been determined. They're now working through 24-25. Clearly, this has cash flow implications for all the firms involved, because we have expensed these resources and we haven't been paid for the work that we've done. So firms are equally keen to have a value determined. My understanding is it will be fairly imminent, because they're now started to look at the process for 25-26.
Let's hope they get organised soon. But I have to raise it. I don't think it's reasonable to keep presenting it, as part of the contract. And I think it's something I have raised as a concern. There's just been, so what you won't know is there's annual questionnaire on what we think of audit. And that's one of the concerns I've put in there, is that, every year we end up with this situation where we don't know how much we're paying. And I don't believe that's right.
Is that, it's just like, it sounds like it's always the case though. If you're never sure of how much work you need to do, depending on what extra you need to do, given what we provide to you, then presumably there's a base figure. And then there's this, is the TBC is kind of on top of that sort of, we always charge this, and then there's always going to be an extra depending on what that workload is.
Yeah, absolutely. So PSA have determined a scale fee as we record it, and that's the figure that you can see in that table. This extra element is a scale fee variation process. Now, what I liked to do previously is I like to include a range. So I can't say exactly, but I'd like to include, well, this is an estimate, but bear in mind this is an estimate. We were asked to stop doing that because they wanted it to be determined. But I think it's a good point, and I will take it back and see if that can be fed back up in our liaison meetings with PSAAs to see if they're happy for us to estimate on the basis that it is an estimate at that point in time.
I think an estimate at least gives us a working figure and also helps our finance team with budgeting. You know,
You'd kind of have sort of a historic average, wouldn't you, in which you can place that estimate probably.
Councillor Fredericks.
I was going to ask for that as well, because we budget so tightly, as you know, because you audit us. We can't continue with that situation, because if we're trying to budget and balance a budget and then a bill comes for another £100,000, then that's really not very helpful. I'll probably say that in the understated terms. Is there a cap for local government? There isn't a local government cap on what you can charge.
No cap, but that's the whole process that PSA apply to make sure that any additional fee is supported by the work that's been performed by the auditor. What I should say is, in terms of the fee that was submitted to PSAA, so I do email Don with that indicative fee, and it's an estimate. So Don is aware of it from, I suppose, budgeting point of view. It's just what we don't do is then put it in public documents, because it's not determined at that point in time. So, there is a figure that has been submitted. We don't know if that will be the figure that gets determined at the end of the day, but there is a figure that has been shared for budgeting purposes, I guess.
So we are not able to look at that figure in this meeting.
We've been asked not to include it in public documents. So maybe have a meeting afterwards. But I guess to answer your question in terms of a cap, Don knows what the cap is now, because it's only going to go down from that figure. So there is kind of a cap at that point in time.
I suppose it's one of those things, it's those, negotiating of contracts and what have you, and private figures. But this meeting can always go into a private session if we felt it was necessary. I don't think it's going to gain us enough at this time, but I think maybe as part of our discussions later, we can talk it through. Councillor Holliday, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. This is page 51 with rebuilding assurance. And the management has a certain number of tasks that are essential, and how can we be assured that these will happen? Because it strikes me we're starting from a rather low base. Thank you.
Could you repeat the page number, please?
Page 51.
51.
Our shared strategy to rebuild assurance. Thank you.
Yeah. So yes, in terms of the shared statement on page, the shared strategy on page 51, I think this does reflect what I've given in my previous answer around adequate training of staff in the preparation of working papers, a focus on areas of weakness where resource can be applied to provide the greatest result and value for money in terms of efficiency of using that resource. And in terms of the control environment, we have that tested to a degree by the internal auditor, which will come up later in this afternoon. But in terms of some of those key risks of the 25-26 audit, we have more confidence because we also already have an opinion that a lot of the control environment is effective. But that notwithstanding, we've also taken on board the recommendations around the treatment of the pension valuation. There was a difference of opinion last year, and we have accepted the auditor's guidance on how that should be reflected in our accounts. And we are mindful of areas of non-current asset valuations, and have instructed independent valuers to provide all that information, as well as our external valuers of the pension scheme, to make sure that it's in the format that and it's got the information that the auditors require.
Thank you. And the last point, that of communicating transparently with this committee, is that going to happen independent of the external auditors or the internal auditors visiting? So would there be times when you might communicate with us that risk, progress and emerging issues come to us other than in this meeting associated with the, as I say, with the external or the internal audit? Does anyone else feel that's an issue?
Has any other member of the committee given that any thought?
Last point was to communicate transparently with us, ensuring that we have clear visibility of risks, progress and emerging issues. And that to me speaks to a communication other than in a situation associated with an external or internal audit report. And I wondered if that was something that we should look to do. I don't know what you guys think.
I suppose that's, so the first part of that is covered in what we've talked about with that headline report, because that headline report I would see is for all the committee. It's not just for me. We work as a team on this committee, I think. And I think, you know, it's important everyone understands what's going on. And I think the other thing with that is later on in the report, we haven't had the last couple of internal audit feedbacks that we were getting. And we're going to talk about a way that we can access that information. So, because I haven't had it either. And the internal auditor and I talked about whether we continue with those. I was keen that we should, but there was another way. And I said, well, it's not my decision. It's the decision of this committee. So I try to bring everything to all of you to make the decisions on. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you. Something to really follow up on what Councillor Hollow just said. If you've got page 74, there is a timetable, but there's not really any milestones for us to be aware of until we get to the auditor's annual report. I just wonder whether you presumably there are some. So I just wonder whether that would be helpful for us to understand what those key milestones are in terms of either receiving papers or producing draft reports, so we can judge whether you're on track getting what you need, whether that would be helpful for you, or certainly be helpful for us, I think, potentially.
Yeah, I was kind of, after you made the recommendation on the previous item, I was kind of thinking, well, what kind of KPIs would be useful for all of us to kind of consider? So your next meeting is in July. So that's almost after the first KPI. So the first KPI is production of the statement of accounts by the end of June. So we'll kind of have that bit. Just thinking about the table that we include in our report in terms of the red, green, amber, we could kind of maybe work out KPIs around that, and kind of almost give you a live dashboard, if you like, that doesn't come to committee, but you're kind of aware of. So the first one obviously is the production of the statement of accounts. Next one would be the provision of all the supporting working papers before we start the audit. So we have a portal. It will have all the requests on there, and there's quite a few. I don't know how many there are, 200, maybe 100, 200. There's a lot. But before we start the audit, we look to see that we've got responses for all of those. So again, we can kind of give you out of the 200 requests, we've got 50, we've got 150, we've got 175. They're all there. Again, so that gives you kind of assurance that that first level of query has been actioned. We then kind of move into the live audit reporting. That will be October, November time. So it's probably that bit beforehand that you're going to be more interested in. I guess when we get the draft accounts, before we get to October, we do some high level checks on that first set of draft accounts. So we'll do your adding up, we'll do your cross-referencing, we'll make sure the comparatives agree to the last set of accounts. We'll do a bit of disclosure work. So again, that's one of the other KPIs in terms of the quality of the draft accounts. Before we've done any work, what's the quality of the draft accounts? So So I was just trying to picture what would be useful. And I think those, if the committee agrees, are maybe the kind of areas that we could kind of give you a live update on as the audit progresses via Don.
I think that sounds very sensible to me. I think those are eminently sensible KPIs because they're the crunch points, aren't they? I mean, if you look at that timeline, yes, you know, the first thing that came to me when I sort of sat there going, June, July, August, you know, it's not a long period of time between now and then, but equally, we need to know what should be going on in there rather than just sitting, waiting, hoping it's all going. Councillor Fletcher.
How far does your timetable coincide, as it were, with the timetable of GRAC meetings? I mean, I should know, I know, but I don't.
I haven't got all the timetables here. So I presume there's one in July. Is there one in September?
Bear with us a second. It looks like
Adam's
Abel Clark is about to tell us.
Technical problems about that. But yeah, absolutely. So after July, we have got a meeting in September. I've not got the date directly. I think it's early part of September. Our GRAC meeting is in, David. I can ping that to you. Obviously, get that to you for an update. But yeah, we go September and then December again after that. So,
which is actually quite ideal for the timing of the main audit. So in July, we can report about the production of the accounts. In September, that's roughly a few weeks before the main audit starts. And at that point, we'd expect the majority, if not all, of the working papers to be there. So again, that's your next kind of touch point in terms of, well, so essentially we are being more robust with clients this year. So it's kind of a question of, we need the working papers there before we start. Probably in previous years, if there's 50% of the working papers there would make us start. What we're saying now is actually that kind of indicates we can't do an audit if you've only given us 50% of the working papers. So again, September meeting looks like an ideal time.
You might have expected to have the working papers in a reasonable state by September.
Yeah, I would have, yeah, because the audit is about to start at that point.
That would be a good sort of meeting to have it. I mean, it'll correspond. I was just worried that we might not be meeting until December or something like that, when the whole process would have washed through, and you know, we'd have missed the opportunity to discuss it.
No, and we've also asked for these headline on a monthly basis. So Section 151 officer would like to come in.
Thank you. Yes, I do see the value and the record of presenting information, the value in presenting information to this committee. However, I've also got to be mindful that the logistics around producing GRAC papers, they have to be sent out 6 working days before the meeting. So if the meeting is mid-September, for example, then the first week in September, the auditor's update report has to be submitted, and not all the working papers will necessarily be on the portal the first week after school starts, to give you a more realistic context. So I think the email circulated reports may be more timely, in that you haven't got that 2-week lag between here's the latest information, this is where we are, and then you discuss it, and things have moved on since then, which that's why I think the offline circulated reports may be of more value, but that's up to the committee to decide
I think
what's best.
If we've got the offline circulated reports, we can bring them with us to discuss. I don't think, what I would hate to do, and I'm sure the committee would all agree, is to distract resource from doing the important work because you're trying to write other papers for us as a committee. That's why I said a headline. I think it's really important that we don't distract resource, but at the same time, we do need to know what's going on, because we just can't end up where we are again. Okay, I had a question on, sorry, did anyone else on the committee have any more questions? I had a question on page 88, which really is more for the monitoring officer, probably. Page 88. I think all of us welcome the strengthening of public office accountability. You know, I think there are some of our colleagues that don't, you know, we've all had that situation where we've wanted to be able to push somebody who hasn't followed through with the code of conduct correctly and been told, well, all we can really do is slap them on the wrists. Well, that's not acceptable in public office, I don't think. We can see that there's going to be some strengthening of that. I just wondered whether there was any more than what is included in the report, that you're able to throw any light on that for us at the moment.
I completely appreciate your comments in regard to what is essentially the code of conduct and sanctions. In regard to that, a consultation took place. I think it's government's intention to make those sanctions stronger and make some changes, but as yet it's not enacted, so I haven't got any further information beyond what's here.
Okay, I'm sure you'll bring it back to us in due course. Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? If not, I think we're asked here to make sure that we accept the what's the word I want, materiality included in the report. Otherwise, we note it. Are we happy with the figures included in the materiality? And if I propose that we accept those, can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Fletcher, can I have a vote on that, please? Thank you very much. Right, then we note that report. Lovely, and we move on to our internal auditors' reports. Thank you very much to our external auditors for your time.
Thank you. So you've got our latest progress report, which is the final one for the audits that were done in 25-26. So all the work is now complete. It's only the procurement one, which is still in draft, and we're just waiting to finalise that. But in terms of this report, it's complete, and we've given you the executive summary for that, so you've got the details. So they're all positive assurances, and you've got 21 outstanding recommendations at the time we did this report for Audit Committee. Remember that the outstanding number in this progress report is different to the annual report because I take a cut of where we are at the end of the year. So the two won't be the same. In terms of the monthly reporting that we do for you, what we're proposing is that we already do a Power BI dashboard, which I think Don and Dan have access to, which does cover the outstanding recommendations. What you get on the dashboard is not only the table that you get in your email, but you get it broken down by audit and by officer, and you'll see the latest response update that's provided. So you get more information. You just have to go through the Teams channel to go into the Teams channel, and then you click on it and it comes up and you can have a look at it. So that's what we're proposing. The other slight change in the timing is that in order to not kind of do it like almost every 2 weeks when we get to audit committee dates, we're going to do it so it updates in time for audit committee. But then in the space between the two audit committees, we're going to do it kind of at the midpoint. So it will be like every 6 weeks between meetings rather than monthly, because otherwise we'll end up doing it at one point very quickly and there won't be any more updates than what you had. So it's just trying to make it just a little bit more efficient to do, but line up with committee papers as well. So that would mean, yes, that we can let everyone know that it's been updated, and then if you're interested, you can go on the Teams channel, which will get directed to, and yes, you'll see exactly what you saw, but more information as well. So it's more of a technology route rather than an email. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions on this report, please? Councillor Cushing and then.
The budget setting one was quite specifically put in when Tina was still here, in terms of when we did the planning right back when Tina was here, about would any work on budget control be useful, and at a very specific point that she was thinking about, to make sure that people were monitoring their budgets okay at that point in time. When Dan and Don came in, it was considered not necessary to do that. They were quite happy with the controls in place, so the audit got cancelled for that reason. So,
Thank you. Would you like to
Well,
come back?
Yes, I'm in no way making a political point, but the 24-25 budget had I think a £4 million. The difference between the outcome and the actual was £4 million. So that implies itself that something went amiss that year. I'm not sure we really got to the bottom of why that went to amiss. Fortunately, it was in the right way, but it sounds to me like there might be something we want to probe into there, I'd have thought. And
Would the section 151 like to make a comment?
It was coming into the organisation. It was difficult to understand what my predecessor's thinking was in terms of this audit requirement, and so I consulted with my deputy as well, and we both felt that the controls in place were adequate in terms of the additional unbudgeted surplus from 24-25. I recall a slightly lower number, but I'm not going to argue the differences. There are a number of things where assumptions are made in the budgeting process, which are done for prudence. I have a legal obligation to produce a balanced budget. And so to achieve that, my predecessor may have made particular assumptions to do that. There have been certain grants we have received during the year which have had very little clarity on the amount, let alone the purpose. And we've only received clarification much later on. A particular example is the extended producer packaging levy that's applied by government on manufacturers of food packaging, and some of that money, that tariff is applied to those manufacturers and distributed to collecting and disposing authorities. And we've had very little clarity until quite late in the year as to what we would get and what we could spend that on. We now have that clarity for 25-26, so we have more confidence. But in terms of there's also a restriction on the number of internal audit programs we can do due to capacity of subcontractors and as well as teams. And it may well be the case that well, I know it's the case that focus is placed on areas where internal audit can add the most value to investigate significant risks to the organisation, and where we have our own controls that we have confidence in, we would rather deploy that internal audit resource to provide assurance on areas where we have less confidence. So a risk-based approach, in summary.
Thank you. You happy with
Could
that
I-
for a minute, and I'll move to somebody else for a question and come back to you, or did you want to come back on to?
No, I mean, it's up to officers to make the judgment on where they think the internal audit will give the best bang for the bucks, I guess. It is a worthwhile point that we'd cancel something in an area where we did have a major blip. So if you're confident the processes are working, well, that's the Section 151 officer, that's obviously your call. So it's worth highlighting.
Councillor Fredericks?
I seem to remember that we didn't have a grant register or an effective one at that time. And I think that was a lot to do with that amount of money that was coming into the organisation that we didn't know where it was going at that time. And I'm just really pleased to see that in these papers that we are or have that grant register now, so that won't happen again.
Thank you for that question or observation. Yes, that was something that was identified as part of the external audit of 25-26. I hate to say it, but there are several local authorities, including large unitaries, that do not have effective grant registers. It's not an unusual weakness, but as a finance professional, I find it very frustrating not knowing what money we've got available, and not also, so there's the one about, are we deploying the resources given to us effectively for the benefit of our residents and businesses? Number one. Number two, I need to have confidence in the restrictions that are attached to those grant funds, and to make sure we're compliant with those risks. And so this is an area of concern and an area of focus that we're bringing together that grant register, and we'll continue to update it. It's not something you put on a shelf and leave. It's a living document.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Holiday.
Thank you, Chair. Page 128, Section 106 doesn't come out very favourably. Now, as far as for as long as I've been here, Section 106 has been an issue, and we've had some outstanding people in post, but it still seems to be an issue. And it's not just the one urgent recommendation that's been raised, but it's quite a bunch of priority 2 ambers. And what assurance have we that this very important area is receiving the attention it deserves? I know there's a new person in post, and I'm sure they'll do a fantastic job, but the outcome at the moment doesn't seem to be entirely favourable. Thank you.
I think it's a fair comment. It is an incredibly complex area, though, and it takes a while to untangle. So would the internal auditor like to comment on that at all? Officer Hems.
I was going to say Councillor Fredericks is looking at me expectantly. Yes, at the time of this audit, there was an officer in post, and good progress was being made. One of the issues around Section 106 officers is they're a little bit like finance professionals. They are quite rare. And the relevant officer was offered an opportunity elsewhere that we were unable to match. We have undertaken recruitment into that post, and the officer is making good progress. But obviously, there was a short period of time in between the officer handing their notice in and going through recruitment, which has resulted in us not making the progress on this that we want. But I am confident that we are making good progress, and my expectation is that many of these will be sent for sign off to internal audit in the next few weeks.
That sounds promising. Are you happy with that answer?
Because it's a long running problem, would it be possible to have an update on that? If you're saying that
about a feedback in July at the July meeting, because that's a few weeks, just over a month.
That'd be good.
Is that possible?
That's possible.
I'm happy to do so. What I would say to you is, in terms of the latest response, that is the feedback on progress at this point in time. So for my clarity, it'd be useful to understand what you would like beyond that.
I suppose it's knowing whether any more have been shut down and whether but we'll be able to see that in the is it VIP board?
So I'm happy.
VI.
Sorry, Anne.
VI. Yeah, I'm getting carried away with power now.
I'm happy to get you an update in terms of the progress towards those and what's intended in terms of the dates, etc. And I'm happy to circulate that to members of GRAC separately from this, and then you can have it as for the minutes at the next meeting.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Another outcome, such as the Execom system being updated, being up to date and usable, that we could be referred to, that would be as good. Thank you.
Councillor Cushing.
Thank you for the second bite of the cherry, so to speak. If you look at our outstanding recommendations, there are about 20 odd in there, and all of them have a revised due date of the end of this month, with the exception of 3 of them have a revised due dates of the end of July. So are we absolutely confident those will all be cleared? So when we come back here in July/September, there will be no outstanding recommendations.
Councillor sorry, I wanted to call you councillor this afternoon. Officer Hems.
I think Officer McCullum had his hand up first, so I'll defer to him in case he...
See.
Thank you, Officer Hems. I think that's a very keen observation, Councillor Cushing. There are several that have been assigned to the Assistant Director of Finance and Assets. And I think it's fair to say when this report was prepared, that was a fair view of where we are. But due to personal circumstances, I think that could well slip to later in the summer. So several of his may well slip.
I think if I can add to that, so as part of the work we do on the Performance Productivity Oversight Board, we push where those officers where they are getting to that date to say, right, what date are you going to achieve it by? I am one of the people who have got a name against there where my good intentions might be usurped by other issues coming into this authority, which have to take my time. I had hoped that in terms of some of the things to do with risk management, I would be able to have written those or sent those for sign off by now so that they could have been completed to the satisfaction of internal audit. But sadly, other work has come in. So I think where we push officers and say, can you achieve this? We ask them for a realistic date. I think we have moved significantly over the years from a position. I recall a point where we had a significant number of outstanding recommendations that were just being rolled forward and rolled forward and rolled forward. And so we're not at that point anymore. But I do take your point that we need to make sure that we are holding, I think, as you referred to, officers' feet to the fire in earlier, in respect of getting those things moved forward in a timely manner. But I also recognise that on some of these, there are a number of competing demands that we have to manage, and unfortunately, me included, some of those has meant I've had to prioritise other work beyond this at the current time.
I think that's a fair point. I mean, there has been massive improvement. I mean, I know when I took over as chair of this committee, it was like every year we had lots of outstanding audits. Now we've only got one really long outstanding audit, which I understand is now well in progress and hopefully should be resolved soon. And then we're into the last 2 years. Would I like all of them closed? Yes, obviously I would. But I think we have made good progress. And I think that's going in the right direction. So, Councillor Penfold, I believe you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just having a look at one of the recommendations, which has rolled on for 4 years. which is on page 124. So that's the our penalty charge notice, our PCNs with Kings Lynn.
That is
That-
now well in hand.
Yeah, well, that was my question really, because it said we're signing the new service level agreement. Whether we have or not, I don't know. I mean, given that that's 4 years in the making, I assume we have been receiving that 40% over those 4 years, or have we been waiting for it? Or
So I'll answer, and Officer McCullen, yes, we've been receiving 40%. I think the audit recommendation is, how do you know, how can you guarantee you're receiving every single one of those penalty charge notices? I don't think there's any indication or in the recommendation that there's anything untoward with that. It's just about the systems that are in place to enable us to do that. So this recommendation has been something that's been worked on for quite some considerable time. It is reliant on an external body or an external partner. I think it's fair to say that there's been quite a lot of work put into trying to get to a point where we can negotiate that within the service level agreement. We are dealing with a different person at Kings Lynn, and I think it's fair to say that that relationship is a more open one to achieving this. So I have reasonable confidence. I can see Teresa Sharman nodding her head. I think we hope. I think it's confidence more than hopefulness, but I think it is confidence that we will be able to achieve that in the not too distant future.
I just hope we haven't
That's really-
wasted huge amounts of officer time on something like this, because you spend more on that than you do on the 40% that's rolling in from the fine. So it's like a false.
I think that's a very good point that you've made, and officers in the parking and finance teams have seen a dramatic improvement in the relationship since there's been a change in personnel to our delegated service provider. I think there is, with my financial hat on, obviously the controls around our money and are we getting all of our money are very, very important. But also the purpose of enforcement isn't necessarily revenue generation in its own. So a very effective enforcement regime would be no fines because everybody's paid their parking. So that's also hard to measure through this control, where if we saw the gross income go down, does that mean we're just actually better driving the right behaviours amongst the parking public?
It's an interesting one, but it's one I'm sure we'll all be very pleased to see closed, because it has long plagued all of us. And I saw, one of the things I looked at was the number of audits that we've done this year. I think it's something you raised has gone down, but actually if you aggregate it across the year, it's quite interesting to see the number of actions that we would have come out of things has actually gone down. So things appear to be moving in the right direction. Would that be a fair assumption? Reasonable assumption?
Yes, it's always difficult to draw comparisons, but yes, the number of audits we're doing is less because we're focusing on, we're not just cycling through audits, and therefore if you keep doing an audit every so many years, then you can cut down on the days because you're doing it so regularly. We're focusing on risks and outcomes and what the council are trying to achieve in our audits. Therefore, they are more in-depth audits. Therefore, they have more days. So we're hoping to get more value out of them in terms of assurance. So yes, by that, there's always a budget for everything. So by the time the days get agreed, we end up with the number we've got. And that's kind of a comparison between the year you're looking at and now this year, very similar audits. But we think we're on the right trajectory from path for what we're trying to achieve with audit to get the most value out of it. So I'm quite happy with that. As long as we do enough to have an opinion, then I'm happy.
I'm also happy when I've seen see a substantial in there, particularly when it's around governance. Officer Hems.
Thank you. You're getting there. I think the other comment I would make in respect of the audit process is that previously, as Teresa Sharma's just said, we cycled round because it was your turn again. So it was always, every 2 years, waste management would come on, or so and so would come on, and so we just do even if the audit 2 years previously had got a substantial assurance associated with it. I think now we're looking at it from a point of view of where do we add value, i.e. there's no point in doing an audit again because recently it's had a good assurance level. We want to be looking at where we can identify those areas of weakness and use that to improve our systems and our delivery. So now the process is very much based around that risk approach and us identifying. So I think the fact that we're getting reasonable assurance in a number of areas where we see those as being areas of us wanting to test those processes is very positive from my point of view. It would be very easy. I think you could, like all things, you could game the system. You could say, here you go, internal audit, go and look at things we know are really strong, because that would give us really good assurance all the time, and that wouldn't help us as an authority improve, and it wouldn't give you as a committee any opportunity to actually understand where we are with our services. So I'm really pleased that we're using the approach that we are now, that we're having those conversations with assistant directors in terms of the planning of audits, because I think that gives us real strength in the approach that we take to them.
Thank you. Any other questions, or are we happy to note the report? I believe we just need to note the report. Yes, thank you. And yes, I'm assuming the committee is all happy to have a link to this system so that we can access the information when we want to about progress. So that is accepted. Thank you very much. Right. Thank you. We don't need a vote then if we're noting it, do we? So we move to the Treasury Management Report. And I asked, did everyone see that there was an update issued on this? I'm just going to ask, did the auditors wish to leave us? Because you're very welcome to stay. But if you wish to disappear. Did you want 5 minutes? Did the rest of the committee want 5 minutes just to? Okay. The meeting's been running for 1.5 hours. So yes, let's have a short 5-minute break. Right, welcome back. Thank you very much, everyone. Are we now live again? Lovely, thank you. So we're going to move to the Treasury Outturn report, which is the next item on our agenda. You will have been aware that every one of us was sent an update to the report. You all had it? Does anyone have any questions on the Outturn report? Councillor Cushing.
Point of clarification around the interest paid for our borrowing. I'm struggling to find the page, as you can have it. So, Public Works Loan Board, yes, that's right, yes. I did see it in, I think it's page 185. Appendix A.
185.
Yeah, that's just slightly higher than I was expecting. That was all. Is that those are the correct rates? Or they could say look equivalent to sort of bank rates you might get down at NatWest.
So Public Works Loan Board, which is where local authorities, including ourselves, borrow for the short, medium or long term. They do fixed rate loans up to 50 years. They are set by Treasury a coupon rate above government gilts. So it's really driven by the cost of government borrowing, and it's passed on through the PWLB rates. Those rates are updated 2 times a day. And that's publicly accessible document. For a 50-year loan right now, you're looking at about 6.5%, which affects the premium that investors want to borrow money from the government, and then they add a little bit on and charge that on to us. So 5-6 years ago, a 50-year maturity loan, when government debt was government gilts were very low, there was a low additional premium required, and PWLB borrowing rates were fixed at around 1.5%. So that's one of the reasons why when we borrowed this time last year, we did not borrow we borrowed for working capital. We don't hypothecate loans. We don't say this loan is for that asset. It's for the general pool. We manage the cash in our bank most effectively. And we took that decision to borrow in the short term for just 1 year at a time. And we will look again close to the time of renewal as to whether we need to re-borrow that current debt of £5 million. And if we determine at that time that borrowing rates are still relatively high to the long term, which in my opinion they currently are, then we wouldn't seek to lock us into a long-term interest charge, and instead we would borrow in the short term to not overexpose ourselves to long-term debt and high interest rates.
A follow-up on that, if I look on page 177, if I'm reading that correctly, we have about £25 million invested. So the obvious question is, why do we borrow when we've got money that we could? It's a question all of us should have on a personal basis, I guess, as well.
So in terms of the money market funds, looking at that table on page 177, Treasury investments, money market funds are basically slightly better than a deposit account, but easily accessible. So that's where we place money for the very short term. And it's driven by surpluses in our cash flow, the timing of grants, the timing of collection of business rates, the timing of payments onward to the people we owe money to, like the county council, the police, the parish for their precepts. So that varies. We have kept that £20 million fund relatively intact, because it also helps offset our capital financing requirement where we're using borrowing by debt. We're not overexposed in terms of we've got lots of long-term debt and lots of money sat in the bank. We take a balanced view to make sure that we have enough cash to meet our obligations. And I think one of the drivers of high levels of cash at year end was around advance payments of grants. We received a forward payment of the Coastwise grant from the Environment Agency for spending this year. Where we've received grants in advance of spend, we obviously don't want to expose that cash. If we don't meet those grant requirements, we need to refund it. So Coastwise is a good example where we're giving money around education, around adaptation. If we're not able to fulfill that spending requirement within the period of the original CTAP programme, we would then need to be prepared to repay that money, but we're looking at ways of redeploying that into the new CAP programme. So we've got more cash at year end because we've been paid a lot of grants in March.
Just one point, indulge you, just one more question. So when I look at the strategic bond funds, what sort of interest rate do we normally get on those?
On the money market funds, it typically runs around CPI, maybe slightly higher. So it protects its real term value, but obviously not as much as the borrowing cost. So we are looking if we can afford to not renew the PWLB debt, but if we take on any new ungrant funded expenditure through the capital programme, we'll look at that again about externalising debt.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Holiday, did you say you'd like?
I think it's just looking at it from the same thing from a different angle. Looking at short-term investments on page 172, it's the same number, 15 million. And that you're saying that's the Coastwise money you've popped into a short-term investment rather than, yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Penfold.
Don, I don't want to open up a can of worms, but I'm going to mention LGR and sorry, very quickly. Presumably you're part of working groups going forward looking at this with other officers, relevant officers or equivalent officers from other authorities within Norfolk. So how is that factoring into sort of our investment strategy and sort of short-term investment strategy, because LGR is just around the corner? And what's going to happen to all of this?
So in terms of LGR, we've had the Minded 2 decision, which there may be a judicial review from the new County Council administration. The Minded 2 decision is we would merge with Great Yarmouth and the two outer halves of Broadland and South Norfolk to create the East Authority. There are a number of work streams being undertaken by the Section 151 officers around assets, around debt, around trading companies, around council tax, harmonisation. We've already taken the lead. The SRO for that work stream, I believe, will be the Chief Executive of Great Yarmouth Borough Council, who is a finance professional herself. So again, we've got the right leadership around those work streams. At the moment, we are doing extensive work around collating information, and we tend to be underborrowed compared to some of our compatriots or neighbours, especially those who have got housing revenue accounts, because they borrow to maintain their council houses. And also County Council has a large amount of debt. How that debt will be divided up is to be determined. Presumably that will be a decision for the shadow authorities to agree, though the working parties and work streams and the joint committees, if they're founded, will get together before then to make recommendations. but no decision will be made before May 2027 when the shadow elections are held. But there's various models that have been tried in other locations where they've gone through unitarisation, and it's either council tax base or head of population. But from what we've been advised from people involved, independent consultants involved in those particular divvying up, it's worked out about the same, whichever model you go through. So yes, our cash assets will go to contribute to the Eastern region, and those with higher levels of debt, the Eastern region will inherit its fair share of those higher levels of debt.
So none of that is really affecting our sort of immediate investment strategy here as a council.
I have an obligation to maintain business as usual. And so things like our strategy, like our midterm financial strategy, currently extend beyond vesting day to make sure that we are still managing our financial assets effectively to continue to deliver services regardless of what happens. And I take that very seriously, that we will not be, we will have sufficient resources to continue if there's some sort of delay to the process. It's not that I have any indication there will be a delay.
Thank you. And it's interesting, I had a conversation with somebody today about, the only thing we see, central control sees as possibly impacting things is if we get a change of Prime Minister who goes, actually, no. Not likely. Change Prime Minister maybe, but who knows? Councillor Fletcher.
Sorry, this doesn't relate directly to the report, but it does relate to the matter under discussion and to finance. And this is actually sort of going right back to page 38, where if you look under the heading local government reorganisation, it says during this period of change, the council has maintained essential services according to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government guidance issued in 2025. Decisions made by the council prior to reorganisation regarding ongoing service delivery in the medium-term financial strategy should focus on providing value for money for taxpayers and avoid limiting future decisions or sustainability of new councils. I just wondered how far that was compatible with protecting the assets that we have, the sort of material assets as opposed to the financial ones. And to a certain extent, that would influence the behaviour of, hopefully, of a future council.
So I will try and keep brief because I'm mindful of the extensive agenda.
We're wandering a bit off topic here, really.
It's strictly not on piece, although it does to a certain extent intersect with it.
So to make sure that, so the next phase in local government reorganisation is the statutory change order, restructuring order that we now know won't be laid before Parliament in July, but instead will be October. The earliest that will be enacted will be January, February of 2027. That will dictate the formation of joint committees, how they're formed, which is the advisory body before the shadow elections in May 2027. As part of that structural change order, there is directives and instructions and advice on how councils should conduct their financial affairs. In the meantime, the objective, just to summarise it and oversimplify, is to make sure that there is oversight by the other predecessor councils over the behaviour and the decisions made during this period by those councils. So essentially, to stop, there'll be joint oversight on approving new spend, so new capital expenditure, new revenue contracts, so that one council cannot spend all its resources and create huge liabilities for the successor unitary. So there is, and also there is within the 8 Norfolk councils, there is very close collaboration amongst the Section 151 officers. We don't go through each other's budgets on a bi-weekly basis, but we do talk to each other, which we're told is very encouraging by people from the ministry.
I think it's worth saying that, you know, it is encouraging because it doesn't happen everywhere, that there is proper collaboration. So this is to be applauded. Does anyone have any other questions? No? In which case we will move on. Thank you very much indeed. Is everyone happy to recommend it to full council? Could I have, if I propose that we recommend to full council? Seconder, Councillor Holliday? And looks like it's unanimous. Thank you very much. Right, major projects. Thank you for being so patient. Does anyone have any, would you like to make any comments on your report?
The Major Project Oversight Board is an extension of the governance responsibilities of this committee, to prevent you having to hear reports on all of them. The findings of the report, we had a deep dive into the Coastwise project, which is undergoing transformation at the moment with the replacement of, as previously mentioned, the previous CTAP to the CAP programme. This we anticipate final consummation from the Environment Agency in at the end of the summer, early autumn, and we anticipate as well that there will be approval for a broader spectrum of investments, which mitigates one of the risks which we had, which is the ability to spend the money and the time we have available to spend it. There's more to do with giving security to residents over their future accommodation options. And that's something that the Environment Agency is very keen to for us to explore. We had a detailed presentation from the project manager on the governance structures. It has a very good board involving not just officers from this council, but from neighbouring councils, as well as stakeholders from central government as well. So really good oversight, comprehensive risk register, and we also went through a good deep dive through some of, not deep dive, but a review of the output reports of some of the other projects we're undertaking. There is also a review of the number of live projects that the corporate project delivery team are monitoring, and that's something we'll see changes to focus their limited resource to add the most value and oversight to the programme. We found it was, some of the recommendations included merging projects where they're under common control and they're basically the same related outcomes.
I suppose my question on that would be, merging projects worries me instantly, because the whole reason for having a project board is to make sure we're doing the right things with our projects, and that we've got all the checks and balances in place. And I just concerned, you know, I appreciate there's a limited resource, but at the same time, we haven't always had the checks and balances we might like in this area.
So a good example was we had 4 projects to do with Flash, not including the 3G pitch. So we felt that because they're managed by a single oversight board for the Flash project board, that it was reasonable to merge those because they were covered under the same scheme and delivered by the same group of contractors and project managers.
Sorry, if
Mr.
I could,
Hem.
yeah, if I can just add to that. So, Officer McCullum was right. There were a number of projects around the Flash project that were run discreetly because they were different at the outset. So the major Fakenham Leisure and Sports Hub project to deliver the Sports Hub was run as an independent project. I think there's very strong governance in place around that in general. We also then had the situation in terms of an application for the public sector decarbonisation scheme, and that was run independently because it was not part of Flash effect. It was part of Flash, but it wasn't part of the main project. However, now we've reached a point where effectively the delivery of the public sector decarbonisation scheme works is integral as part of the rest of the project. So it was felt that there was no benefit of running them independently anymore. So it's just, I think it's, we've done quite a robust process at corporate leadership team in terms of looking at those. It's been through us, and we've provided some question challenge. It's now gone to our management team colleagues for them to go, no, actually, we think you're wrong on this, and it shouldn't be, they should be run separately and independently. But those where it was quite obvious that for whatever reason they had merged or they had become part of the same process, we have now put together. And I have reasonable confidence that for those that we that I have good confidence that those where we've done that, there's both a legitimate reason for doing so and that there are strong oversight arrangements in place.
Okay, my memory just.
I note your anxiety and we'll be mindful of that in further conversations.
I'm very sorry, I have to say, I can't remember your name, but there's an officer at the back of the room, Rob. So, yes, Rob or Steve.
Yeah. Yeah, so there are three program project managers in the corporate project delivery unit, and we align with obviously CLT and management. The slight restructuring of the project profiles has not changed the level of governance that we actually apply. We are increasing governance for three reasons, which Don has outlined. Obviously, we've got the change order, the shadow authority, and vesting day, and projects must be governed with greater rigour through those gates. So we're now using the profiles that have been adjusted by management to make sure that we're applying the right level of pragmatic project management governance to each and every project in the organisation to get it through those processes, because things will change. And obviously we're aware that LGR will impact the profile of the organisation and we need to be prepared.
Thank you. I believe, Councillor Cushing, did you have your hand up? No. Councillor Holliday, then Councillor Penfold.
Lovely, thanks very much. Page 196. So it seems like timeline and resource are the big issues here that we're having problems with. And I see we've got 10 projects not started and 40 in progress. How likely are we to have those completed by the LGR vesting date? So I've got another question if you wanted to think about that. Well,
The gentleman at the back of the room, Rob's able to give us an answer.
Yeah, we're tracking every project against those three key milestones that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Some projects are currently not started because they're either being mobilised or they're being shaped and planned, or they're going through procurement and tender processes, but our complete intention is to get all of the projects done that are on that list and more, because that list only covers the large projects. There are medium projects, small projects, and BAU maintenance projects that we also track, to get all of them done for vesting day.
Okay, lovely. And another cross-reference to the risk register, which we're not looking at today. This got a timeline, a red timeline rating on it, and the risk register doesn't reflect that. It's quite a benign risk register comment on the Rocket House. So I think Rocket Lodge rather. So I think if we could make a note of that.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And find out why they don't link up.
Initial comments is also about timelines and when reports are created, because this report is created independent of the risk register. So there is always, where we're reporting over the same information from two different sources, that it could be taken at different time points.
But
in
surely,
terms of that, if it's Rocket House, we do have certain legal challenges that we need to resolve.
So then it should be RAG rated differently, or the mitigation isn't sufficient then to change the current risk on it. And I'm not so sure about the phasing of reports, but surely we should have a system where they can be synced, because it sounds a little bit old fashioned to me that you can't put them all into one place. Thank you.
it does seem a bit worrying that one reports as one thing and one reports as
So-
another. Hang on, Steve, sorry. Rob wanted to come in.
It's a perfect point, and it's something that we're actually looking at as a program team, is how the report information centralised and synced. At the minute, to Don's point, reports are produced at different times, and if they're not cross-referenced because they're completely isolated from each other, one will be showing one thing and one will be showing another. And we as a team want to get to a point where the central data is always up to date. So at the point that it's printed or shared or reviewed, it's the same in every place.
Is there a schedule for that? Nirvana?
It's something that we're working on as a team and we need to work through with management, but it would probably be a similar system to the Power BI platform.
Officer Hems is poised.
Poised, thank you. I would make a number of comments and I'll try and keep them as brief as possible. The first thing is that, as you've been told, this is an up-to-date report. It will have been produced from you. The report that you've got in terms of risk is a quarter report. You get your reports on a retrospective look of risk at the end of March. So there is a lag in terms of what you get as a report. The second issue is that, yes, you're right. I think there is a position where sometimes there are risks that are flagged in a specific area that will be red, but they're relevant to that. So we're trying to move away from everything being in the corporate risk register where they're service risks. And so the service risk position is coming forward as part of the review of the corporate risk management policy and framework. But also, I think it's fair to say what we're trying to do is to move towards a better risk culture for this organisation. And that's part of the process we're going through at the moment in terms of training, mandatory training for officers who are at a team leader level or above. And that's an ongoing process. So I accept what you're saying in terms of, and I absolutely get what Rob Sales is saying in terms of that nirvana of everything lines up. One of the comments we had on the last audit around our risk register was, you've got too many items on your corporate risk register, try and reduce them down a bit. They should be service risks. So that's where we're moving to ultimately. So some of these will appear on the project related risk. Not everything that's a project related risk translates into a corporate risk.
Thank you very much. Is that clearer? Good. Of Councillor Penfold.
Gonna promote
Being a
me to-
logger.
promote me to- Good evening, Cromer. Right. Sorry. Just reminds me of being on stage. So just site board is an important element of our project management and performance framework. That's great. But back on page 152, when we were looking at audits, I noticed that the project management framework audit was one that we hadn't done because it was a low priority and there wasn't a sufficient budget to complete it. But I just wondered whether that was sensible given the importance that we're now attaching to projects, the money that's involved, the management that's involved, and some of the nervousness that you've outlined. So I didn't bring it up then, but just now, we're talking about project management and it's an audit that we've decided not to do. So a comment and a question, really.
Yeah. I'm
Hang on, just one-
not sure how it came around, but we have actually put ourselves forward and are currently going through a TIAA audit for project management governance, which we're right in the middle of. I think the outcomes of that will be coming out early July. So we can probably give an update on that position soon.
I think Councillor Penfold, it was cancelled last year, out of last year's audit, because obviously we'd had a change in terms of section 151 and a little bit of a gap, and the project management arrangements we wanted to make sure were firmed up and in place to be able to get the maximum value out of the audit position.
So is it something that we ought to revisit now that we're settled with our
Well, it's
151?
being done now.
It's in the plan, correct?
So effectively, it was just delayed for 12 months till the structure was there, really, I suppose. Councillor Fredericks.
I need a couple of questions. Don't worry, Mr. Hems. I'm just going to ask, where is the political oversight on these boards? Do we have political oversight?
No.
And who's the cabinet member for that?
No, there is no political oversight on these boards. They are officer boards and they report in here. So you're the political oversight. They were recommended as part of the, if you remember, our Local Government Association Corporate Peer Challenge. One of the recommendations was that we should have a number of officer-related boards so that we could have the internal challenge before they came here. And so I've been coming regularly as part of the, I can't remember, I'll just refer to it as PPOB. So I've got to remember the order, the Performance and Productivity Oversight Board, which has been running now for some time. And I think you see the result of that in the fact that the number of audits that are outstanding has gone down from however many it was down to what we are at the moment. And those are not so long standing as they always used to be, etc. And they're not just rolling forward. So there are a number of things, they're an internal management tool to enable us to be able to turn up to meetings such as GRAC and go, yes, we've got things in hand. You can have a reasonable level of assurance from officers internally that we have steps in place that make sure the information we're giving you is correct and that we've got oversight of these things. So no, they're not a political board, or they're not a member board. It was deliberate. It was a deliberate recommendation by the LGA peer review team that they should be done in that manner.
And I think actually it works better than the old system of boards where we had officer and political membership, because then we had so much confusion about who was doing what and what couldn't make what, and briefings and things. So I think this works a lot better.
I think, Chair, it respects this group, because if you then have another group that's looking at governance, risk and audit around projects, we're duplicating work both on an officer basis but on a member basis. Even if the member cohort is made up from members of this, you have a full oversight of what's going on, because we come and tell you about, we give you a report. Okay, you only get that a couple of times a year, but if we had exceptions to anything, the board would come forward and say we need to report to you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any more questions on this report? No? Lovely. Do we just note this report? All happy to note the report? Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right. So we come to this. There were one or two points you wanted to look at on the risk register this time, although we have said we'd defer it to the next meeting. So would you like to say which bits you'd like us to give steering on?
So yes, this is, I mean, it's before you. I'm happy to take any questions. I think the issue in particular, in terms of the reason for it, you not going through it perhaps in the level of detail, is that, well, there are two things. First is that I'm working on the policy and framework to try and incorporate a number of changes that were brought up as part of the audit recommendations, but also respect the points that were raised by Mr. Platten, the independent person. And so in part, that's a work in progress, which I have indicated that we'll have back to you in July for you to look at in more detail for sign off. So this report is your Q4 report. I'm happy to pick anything up that you may have, but I think it partly respects the information or the position that Mr. Platten wanted, in that I have put more of a so what in. But I think of particular note, there are a couple of recommendations there. One is CRO 35, which is the local plan. We adopted it in December the 17th, 25. On that basis, it's done. It doesn't need to be on the risk register anymore. So we take off the local plan. And the other one is a recommendation that we basically add in the local plan review, which is a new piece. And I think this is part of the maturity I've been referring to in terms of our approach, because I think what we'd have done before is just leave the local plan on and it would have just run on, under the old one. But now we're actually beginning to remove things and put things back on. So the recommendations are that we remove the old local plan CRO 35 and that we add CRO 46, which is the review of the local plan documentation as a new risk. And then,
sorry, can I just jump in on that individual point? But aren't we just yesterday, we started a new call for sites for a new local plan?
That is the review of the local plan. So it's the local plan review. So we now have 30 months to go back through the process that we've just completed. And it's primarily due to a change in the legislation and the approach. So effectively, we're in a situation not dissimilar to other local authorities. So those are the two recommendations. And then in terms of the actual report, there are a couple of red areas in terms of residual risk score. One is the medium-term financial plan, and the other one is not achieving net zero. And I've tried to put in a little bit there of the so what that Mr. Platten had asked for, in terms of, well, these are the implications of those being in that way and our tolerance to or acceptance or tolerance. I think particularly in terms of not achieving net zero target, we're in a position effectively where we had a net zero strategy that took us down towards that achievement by 2030. But that at the time was also backed up by that government saying that if you didn't achieve that by that time, you'd either have to offset or have financial penalty. And that's now gone. So there's less of a risk to us. The risk becomes more reputational than financial. So that's the first so what. And the second thing is that effectively we have a number of areas where we're either making choices because of financial prudence or financial security in terms of increasing the number of temporary accommodation units that we purchase, which takes us in the wrong direction from a carbon point of view, but from a financial point of view is much better off because we are able then to control, etc. Food waste is a mandatory requirement by government, but we're going to have to buy a whole new fleet of vehicles that are going to take us in the wrong direction because we're running more rounds. So there are lots of reasons behind that, and I've tried to explain them a little bit in there.
Thank you. I think for me, the problem is it's about policy there. For me, us becoming, sorry, I was on the council, some of us were, when we declared the climate emergency. And we didn't declare it because of government targets. We declared it because we cared about our environment. And I think to hear anything other than that, I find difficult. I appreciate we've got to do these things. I absolutely accept that. But I think we need to be very careful of the wording in our documentation, because we appreciate the responsibilities we have to our community in delivering the projects that enable them to get fitter, that enable their waste to be collected. But it doesn't mean it's not because we've changed our tolerance to the risk. I think that there needs to be some careful word in there, because when I read that, I was like, no, that's not right. That's not why.
I appreciate that, and I'm happy to amend that for the report. I think it is just about the position we find ourselves in terms of some of the elements that we either are being required to do or have chosen to do, mean that we are taking on more carbon production, even if I guess you could argue in terms of that homelessness position, in terms of temporary accommodation, we've chosen to take on TA, we'd have still been housing those people elsewhere that have been in nightly paid accommodation. So actually all we've done is move carbon into our scope, rather than it just becomes our responsibility rather than others. That's the challenge we have.
I think I absolutely appreciate the reasons. I think all the right things are being done. We have to do these things to support these people that find themselves in that situation, the waste collection, etc., etc. I just think it's the stated reason. I don't think there'd be anyone on the council of any persuasion who would disagree that we want to do those things and they're the right things to do. We just need to make sure the way, very often now, I think when we talk about this council won't exist in 2030. So, there are other reasons not to be hung up about it, but it doesn't mean we don't. The main reason for declaring that was because we all cared about our environment.
Just to say that you're absolutely right, because I was on the council at that point and I didn't know about those government targets or whatever, but that's the reason we declared it, because we were concerned about the environment. So not only is there an impact on the reputation of the council if we don't achieve it, there's an impact on the environment of North Norfolk.
So I'm sure we will come up with some suitable framing of words that will.
Oh, absolutely. And I think actually, I'm more than happy to do that, Chair. I'm happy to reflect that position. I think the declaring of the net zero, the declaration of the climate emergency, absolutely respect that and understand the right reasons why it was done. I think when you look into the background papers, etc., of that particular risk, I was reflecting the original risk as stated. So I'm happy to make amendment as required.
Thank you. Officer Hems has made for our immediate attention. No. Lovely. Then that brings us to sorry, could we please take a vote that we are happy for those two changes to be made to the risk register, please? If I propose, somebody second? And everybody in favour. Thank you. Right. Thank you. Procurement exemptions register. Yes.
You remind me what page?
Page 235 to 236.
So each GRAC meeting, I bring the list of procurement exemptions granted running from the date as detailed at the bottom of the report. I follow on from the last period, unless there's any questions.
No questions, thank you. So I think we've created a new action list this afternoon, which I'm sure our clerk will be happy to just run through for us.
Yep, absolutely. I'll just go back through those points. Obviously, it was in relation to initially, obviously, the external audit, and obviously you're going to happy to liaise yourself, Chair, with the relevant officers in relation to discuss with those relevant officers, Section 151 officer, and the deputy leader is also the finance officer, into ways of releasing those funding the additional capacity. And also, obviously, we were going to ask for the monthly updates from the Section 151 and the external auditors on the progress of what needs to be done on a monthly basis. We also had, obviously, with the internal audit, the changes to the reporting, so the monthly cycles obviously gone from to sort of the monthly to the 6 weekly basis, obviously in between our meetings, and obviously they'll get us a link, internal audit kindly, to get onto their reporting system. Quickly going through the other ones, obviously there, I think that was the main. Oh, we had. Do apologise. Yep, just found the other one. I think it was on director there of service delivery. Officer Hems was happy to obviously try and liaise with the Section 106 officer to circulate obviously an update to the committee on that regard. So again, we can sort of add that to the action list as well for you, Chair. We did have one that I was going to sort of update you on that was left on the sort of the action list, which was quite clear really up to that point. And that was obviously the licensing policy, which was actually due to come to this committee today, but obviously we were conscious that it's a very, very full meeting. So we sort of took the decision obviously to put that back a bit. I don't know if Officer Hems had sort of an update there, but I think you were pretty much ready. I think Officer Hems to come back with that. If you were happy to maybe come back to that one, and the committee were happy for the next meeting, probably in September, or if you wanted to see it in July, but obviously I realise that's a special meeting. So perhaps if you want to see that in September, if you were happy. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
I'm entirely content to provide it whenever you would, whenever it goes within your programme. To my knowledge, it's progressing to the point at which it can be shared with you at a future date.
I suppose my question would be to the committee then, if it's ready in July, would we like to see it in July if we're coming in for a meeting anyway? That would give us 3 items on that agenda, which would be more than we had signed up for originally. But if we're coming in anyway, does it make sense to clear that item so that September is freer? Is everyone happy with that? Mr. Hems, if it's possible, but I realise it may not be possible, but if it is, it would be great if it could be wrought.
I will find out and inform Adam Falconbridge at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed. The forward work programme looks very full. I don't think we need to discuss it too much, but we'll keep you posted on what is going on with that. And that leads us to the end of the meeting and the exclusion of press and public, which we don't need to do because we've gone through the agenda. Thank you all very much indeed for your attendance this afternoon, particularly to our officers who have been here a long time. Thank you very much indeed. I have a question for you.